Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Members of the commission, good evening. Hope you are all doing well. I'm very excited to have the students from ASU and Julia Gilbert, who's here. She's a project manager with ASU Project Cities. And this was a very, very exciting endeavor. It was kind of started actually last year with a project that we did with the Palo Verde ruin and a document study that happened. And out of that from last year, we moved and said, hey, let's take this a step further and actually get some information and some input from the community. So that's exactly what we did this semester, and these students are going to present to you about that. What was really cool about this group is they were really involved. They actually all live in the, Central Phoenix, East Valley, Central Phoenix area, but they actually came up and we walked the site together. They had great questions. They were really, really intrigued as to what was going on with the site, and they really, really threw themselves into this project. So I'm really excited to see what they found out, what the interest level from our community is regarding that site. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Julia, who's going to introduce the students. This is their capstone project. They are all going to be graduating here pretty soon, so congratulations to all of you. That's very, very cool. Hope I didn't steal your thunder there. I apologize if I did. But they were a great group to work with. Julie's going to take some time to introduce them, and then they have some presentations for the commission and obviously Q&A as well. So without further ado, Julia.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, and members of the commission here today in Mary Lou for hosting us for this project this semester. So as Nathaniel said, I'm the program manager for Project Cities, which is a program at ASU that's been going on for about 5 years. So I'll just share a little bit about our program, and then I'll kick it over to the students in a moment. So Project Cities started at ASU in 2017, and the program works to connect all of the research, innovation, and initiatives at the university with the local communities in which the university is situated. We do this by working with community partners like the City of Peoria, and then they provide different sustainability-focused projects they need assistance with, such as the Historic Preservation Project. And then we actually match those projects to faculty at ASU teaching courses, and then students get to the projects as part of their coursework. So we really see it as a win-win-win program. We're engaging with local communities, getting faculty engaged with communities, and students are getting that real-world workforce development to kind of lead them into future studies or career afterwards. So we are part of the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, which is the big kind of sustainability-focused area at ASU. We have a lot of different amazing projects and initiatives, and then our department is the Sustainable Cities Network, so the City of Peoria is a member of our network, so we've been enjoying working with you all for many, many years. And we're also part of the EPIC Network, which stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities, a big international network of 60 other institutions doing this type of university community partnership. So we are not alone. Cities like Peoria are right in step with cities all around the world doing this type of work, and we've really enjoyed working with you over the past few years. So as I said, Peoria has been one of our partners for 4 years. We've done dozens and dozens of projects with you, so if anybody has questions about other projects we've done in the past, please let me know. But we've done everything from water to historic preservation to downtown revitalization, so it's been a really fruitful partnership. So the project for this semester, I'll briefly introduce it and then I'll hand it over to the students. So as Nathaniel referenced to, it's focused on historic preservation and historic planning around the Palo Verde ruin. So the specific goals for this project were to first determine the different community perspectives and values related to the development of the Palo Verde ruin. As we did last year during the spring semester with a student who was also in the same course that these students are taking now. She did a big document review of the current historic plan for the ruin as it is and had a lot of great feedback. So these students took her report as well as the site visit and all the different surveys that they collected and whatnot to then build on that and figure out what next steps should be. And then next goal, explore what celebrating arts and culture from diverse backgrounds might look like at the Palo Verde ruin site and throughout the City of Peoria. And then also identifying how peer communities have engaged with tribal nations and indigenous communities on historic planning and preservation. So really gathering all that data from different places that are like Peoria to figure out what to do next. So here today with me, I have 3 amazing students, Julia Richards, Madison Ginsberg, and Belen Lopez. So Julia and Madison are going to go first and do a deep dive into a big survey that they did with the community. I will leave the number of surveys out since I want them to tell you the nice and the good news. And then Belen will wrap up with a focus on different kind of legal and guidelines, pathways for how to work with tribal nations. And then I want to give a shout out to their great professors, Malcolm Goggin and LaDawn Lingard. This is actually an online class, which is really exciting that even though these students are finishing they're about to graduate right now, and this class is online, they actually opted into doing this project with us. So they could have been at home, writing on their computers, never going out into the community, but they chose to work with Project Cities this semester. So I'm really thankful for them and for their faculty members for being supportive of Project Cities. And with that, I will have Pamela turn it over to the first presentation. Yes, that one. Yeah, and then that, but. Okay, and we're gonna do about 15 minutes of student presentation, then we'll open it up to Q&A for this group, and then we'll go to the next one. So we'll have plenty of time for questions. Thank you.
Well, hello, and thank you again for giving us some time this evening. As ASU Watts College graduate capstone students, we have partnered with ASU Project Cities and the City of Peoria's Historic Preservation Commission to develop, distribute, and analyze this Peoria Palo Verde Ruins survey for the spring of 2023. A quick introduction, my name is Julia Richards, and I am a Master's of Public Administration student.
And I am Madison Ginsberg, and I'm also a Master's of Public Administration student at ASU. So this is the agenda for our PowerPoint. We're going to start out with the rationale for our project, and then we're going to deep dive into each of our separate literature reviews, kind of our research that we found online and through other studies, and then we're going to go into the survey overview and our survey findings, and then we're going to have wrap it up with our recommendations.
So the rationale for the project, for this capstone we worked with Nathaniel and on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission. This symbiotic relationship allowed us students to have applied research techniques and work in a real world experience to gather residents' awareness and views on Indigenous preservation within your city. The city's commission, as you know, has 3 main goals. You advise the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission on designated landmarks and historic districts. You also utilize funds to promote historic preservation, and the Commission increases public awareness of landmarks with historical and cultural significance. So our survey sought to gain knowledge on Indigenous preservation opinions from your community so that you can further advise, fund, and increase awareness on this topic.
And just some background on the Palo Verde Ruin, just because we weren't sure how much you guys knew, so we would just give a little blurb. So it is located at 26200 North 73rd Ave in the 85383 zip code in North Peoria. The Hohokam village inhabited it in 950 to 1050 AD, and the ruin once housed 15 residential areas, trash mounds, roasting areas, and ball pits. It was originally 72 acres of lands, and the Hohokam people originally survived by hunting animals and gathering native plants. They had, and then since then, many artifacts have been found at the site, like ceramics, jewelry, arrow points, and groundstone, which was used to grind corn.
All right, so we're going to split up our literature review since we did have different questions on this survey. So before I delve into my literature review, I wanted to demonstrate the 3 questions that I was tasked with questioning the residents of Peoria. The first one was that are Peoria residents aware of the ruin, and if so, how confident are they on the significance that the ruin has? Number 2 was what are resident perspectives on Indigenous preservation within the city of Peoria? And number 3 is how interested residents were in expanding the Palo Verde Ruin as a historical site. So for my literature review, I broke it into these 3 categories, and I will go through those right now. Starting with educational campaigns, Peoria's first adopted general plan for 2040, the mission in that is to increase the enrichment of arts and culture within the city. So recent data suggests that increasing awareness through public art campaign actually increases civilian awareness and appreciation of Indigenous cultures. Education for non-Indigenous peoples is vital, especially if Indigenous representation is very low within that community. There's also an importance of education for Indigenous peoples. When Indigenous peoples are given access to stipends and scholarship for college through agencies like the American Indian College Fund, these students are able to get an education and come back to their communities ready to take on positions of authority with their voices to be influential in the community. In terms of preservation management, I'm sure we're all very well aware that Peoria and Maricopa County are some of the fastest growing areas in the United States right now. So preservation management is vital to maintaining the past while focusing on the future. Mass acres of land development in cities and counties do require assistance from agencies such as the Archaeological Institute of America. These help train law enforcement, civilians, and construction workers on what to do when they find anything of historical value and how to go about next steps in preservation. Indigenous influence and sustainability is also important in preservation management since new isn't always better. And in terms of citizen engagement, it is important to note that though government-led community initiatives may be the easiest way to begin a program, they are not proven to be the most sustainable. Civilian-led community projects are proven to have the best longevity, and citizens of these communities that want a project need to look for key Indigenous leaders to help guide these efforts. Studies show that engaging citizens in historic preservation actually increases turnout at the polls and overall a more engaged community.
And then my research focus was a little different. My two questions that I focused on were what have other cities done to celebrate Indigenous culture and arts? And then what could celebration of arts and culture from a diverse background look like at the Palo Verde Ruins site? So these are other cities that have been able to celebrate arts and culture and celebrate the history of their land. So I'm going to go into a little more about the research of these cities and what they've done. So the first study I found was performed in South Korea, and they were able to utilize their space to celebrate culture. They found that it was a unique selling point for tourism for their community, and it drew people into the area. They also found that in order for these cultural events to have a positive effect on the community, that they needed local citizens to be on board with the idea and included in future development in order to avoid issues down the line. The study also found that the more authentic the cultural events were, the more valuable the event was to the people in the local community and also to the people who were attending the events. And then the next one was in Europe. They have a bunch of cultural festivals that are put on, and these cultural festivals put on an opportunity to bring people together to rejoice in their traditions and celebrate their backgrounds. They also make the city feel more like home, and the citizens feel more celebrated when their culture is celebrated. And these traditions are rooted in cultural heritage, and they are a key element behind the unity of the community, and they're a valuable part of the experience at these festivals. So these European cities take these festivals and they use them to refocus the city's values to create a dialogue between different cultures and respect for identities and other diversity. And then the next one was Missouri, and they recognized the impact that the original settlers had on the land. They named a specific part along the Missouri River after the original settlers. This location now brings tourism, education, and a focus and an impact to the mass immigration in the late 1800s. And then this space also provides a safe space for people to come and celebrate the culture. And so all of these cities have accomplished creating these good events and celebrating culture from a diverse background. These cities provide proof and valuable information about the impact of cultural events in the local community.
And now we will get on to the survey questions and results. So we began the survey by asking some demographic questions of the audience. And for my analysis, I used the zip code and the age categories. I wanted to see if there were any conclusions that could be drawn about possible correlations between proximity to the 85383 Palo Verde Ruins zip code, and then if age played any factor in perspectives. And then Madison will go into more detail about the other demographics that she used as well. So the first question on the survey, well actually to begin, we did survey people online and then at the Peoria Arts Festival. So we found we had 333 respondents with 312 residents filling out every single survey question. So we were very pleased at that. And so we are going to begin with the results. The first question was, are you aware of the Palo Verde Historical Site? And here I got 320 responses, with 69.5% of respondents unaware from all zip codes and all ages. Wow. So, to determine if there was a correlation between awareness and residential zip code, I filtered the data by the 85353 zip code of the ruin versus all other Peoria zip codes that responded. The data found that those that lived in the ruin site numbered 281, and I had 25% about of respondents aware of the ruin, compared to 10% from other zip codes. So this data demonstrates or alludes to the fact that living in the same zip code as the ruin was the reason for the awareness to be increased. However, that still means that 60% of more surveyed residents are not aware of the ruin. Having the average age of Peoria residents being 42.7 according to the 2020 census, I wanted to break up the data by age. The closest category we had would have been under 45 and then 45 and over. I wanted to see if there was any connection in relation to awareness by age. So under 45, 26.4% of the 72 respondents were aware of the ruin, and 23.5% over 45 were aware of the ruin. So this data demonstrates that the age of the resident didn't really make a difference. Still under 30% of respondents were aware. This is a review of the first question that I just asked. For those that responded yes to the Palo Verde ruin, that they were aware of it, I wanted to gauge with a Lingard scale their actual knowledge of its significance. These were the options that we gave them, and of the 71% that were aware of the ruin, of the 71 residents, not percent, 43.6% of respondents said that they were somewhat knowledgeable about the ruin's history, and then this signals that there is still room for increasing awareness and educational history in this space. This is a little bit more of a breakdown that I broke down by the zip code, once again stating the area code where the ruin is, and then all other responses. So this shows us that there is under 1% of respondents being confident, even though they are aware that the ruin does exist. My second question was on perspectives of historic preservation, and this allowed residents to select more than one response, which is why there was 360 selections. However, 51% of all answers selected did state that preservation was important, and the responses here on this chart indicate that the majority of residents were positive about historic preservation. I was interested to see if there was generational differences in perspectives on Indigenous preservation, so I once again divided my data by the age ranges. And as you can see, the specific statistics do vary, but a pattern is apparent. 0 to 0.7% of respondents felt that historic preservation was useless and did not impact them, which means that the vast majority of your respondents in both age categories considered historic preservation to be mandatory, important, or educational, which is a good thing. And my third question was intended to gauge residents' interest in expanding the Palo Verde ruin as a historical site. The response very interested on the Lingard scale took the majority, and it was closely followed by the response of somewhat interested in expansion. Once again, I wanted to break this up by zip code to see where these 309 respondents lived, seeing if there was an interest between the area code and their proximity. So in the 85383 zip code, 41.2% of their 269 responses were very interested, followed by 36% feeling somewhat interested. For those who lived outside of the zip code, 22.5% of 40 residents were very interested, followed by 47.5 being somewhat interested. Though these ratios differ slightly, 23% of all 309 were the ones that said that they were neutral or not interested, which is a very small percentage.
And then these are my questions. So starting out with these ones, I started talking about ethnicity, which is part of our demographics part of the questions. And the top one was, are you Hispanic? And the bottom one is, what is your ethnicity? A high majority of the people responded that they were white, which was not surprising based on the census data. And so 28 responded Hispanic, 24 people responded other and prefer not to answer, but only 2 people responded that they were American Indian or Alaska Native. So this data kind of suggests that the authenticity of future cultural events at the site might be challenging unless a partnership between a local indigenous tribe and the City of Peoria is developed. This question is, what might historic preservation at the Palo Verde site look like to you? And this one had a total of 312 respondents. And this was a multiple choice question, so a lot of people chose a bunch of these. Increasing educational material at and around the ruin was the highest percentage at 33%. And then a close second was improving the Standing Park infrastructure, and third was preserving artifacts in a museum. Only 2% of people said that doing nothing was what preservation looked like to them. So this data shows that people want to see some change, some positive change in historic preservation at the site, and they have positive feelings towards improving the site. Would you be interested in participating in community events hosted at the Palo Verde site? High majority said yes, they would be interested in attending. 70% or 214 people answered that they would be interested in attending events. Only 30% said no, they would not. This data provides great intel on the level of interest that these events have in the community, and shows that if events are put on in the future, people would definitely be interested in attending. What types of events would they be likely to attend? And this one had 212 respondents. And then also multiple choice. So a very high percentage of people said that they would like to attend a cultural fair. And then a close second was 26 and 24%, showing that people wanted to attend an artifact showcase and an arts fair. And then 15% of people said that they would like a storytelling event. And then the people who answered other recommended seeing musical events, and then community social events. And then they also wanted to suggest that any events would be fair as long as they are authentic and honor the ancestors of the indigenous people who live there. So this data shows that if cultural events and fairs and showcases are put on at the site, the Peoria residents would be interested in attending. And then, would you be interested in volunteering with the Historic Preservation Commission and the City of Peoria with regards to the Palo Verde site? 312 respondents, I'm sorry to report this. The highest percentage said that they would not be interested. 97 people said that they would not be interested. But let's see. Overall, if you tally up the people who said that they would be interested, possibly interested, or somewhat interested, that leaves you with 44% of the people positively responding towards volunteering. So this data shows that people are not jumping to volunteer with the site, but a smaller amount of people who would be willing to give their time to the commission and the city in regards to the ruin.
So we're going to go on to recommendations. Mine are going to be awareness campaigns, preservation management, and citizen engagement, and this kind of reflects on my literature review as well as the data that we collected from the survey. So from the findings, no matter the resident's age or zip code, around 25% or less than the 333 Peoria respondents surveyed are aware of the Palo Verde ruin. Successful advertising campaigns and educational campaigns can be done digitally or with in-person materials. Digital marketing trends have more success with that under 45 age bracket, and in person would have a little bit more success with the over 45 age bracket. However, both would be needed to make sure you're reaching your entire residential audience. The Peoria Arts Festival that we attended was a great blend of all ages of residents. So perhaps educational events being hosted alongside those community events is a suggestion of mine. Remember, the most authentic and successful educational campaigns will come from input from Indigenous members of the community, so identifying key residents is a must. In terms of preservation management recommendations, under 1% of respondents selected that preservation was useless or not impactful to them. However, continuing to live off of our land, or this land, as climate change worsens and as the city develops more, is an issue for all residents. Preservation of Indigenous history for a city's future is the responsibility of all residents and employees. Indigenous input into sustainability measures is vital. To reiterate again, new isn't always better. Including Indigenous voices in decision-making over land management allows more diversity, creativity, and allows voices for people who are normally not taken into this account. And in regards to citizen engagement, as I had said in the beginning, citizen engagement and led initiative in historic preservation programs have been the most successful and sustainable programs in my research. Less than 2% of all respondents stated that they were not interested in any form of historic preservation, so you do have an interested civilian base. Focus groups, community town halls, educational meetings, and opportunities for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to come together are ideal. This would give common ground for the community to deem what is important and necessary to bring into the community's future.
And then my recommendations to the city is to provide education through engagement, partner with Indigenous tribes, and trial events in the community. So only 23% of the surveyed population knew of the existence of the Palo Verde ruin. Educating the Peoria residents about the existence of the ruin will improve future turnout of events. There are a few different ways that I recommend educating the citizens, including partnering with local schools and forming volunteer groups. Forming volunteer groups gets passionate citizens involved, makes the citizens feel strongly about the site, and provides the site with advocates in the community. A total of 98 people from the survey indicated that they would possibly be interested or be very interested in volunteering, which means Peoria could find volunteers who would be willing to support the ruin. Partnering with local schools will bring teachers, children, and parents to the site to learn from its past, to become aware of the site, of the site's existence, and of its history. Partnering with local Indigenous tribes, since authenticity is an important part of the experience at the historical sites, it's important that Peoria finds a way to guarantee that future events will be true to the history of the land. 83% of surveyed citizens reported that their ethnicity was white, and 0.9% of Peoria's population is American Indian or Alaska Native. This means that it might be a challenge for Peoria to put on more authentic events without partnering with the local Indigenous tribe. The Hohokam people are said to have left their land due to drought, and later occupants of the land included Pima and Papago tribes. These tribes are said to be direct descendants of the Hohokam people, so I would recommend reaching out to leaders in these tribes and creating a partnership to produce more authentic and meaningful events at the site. And then trial events, 70% of citizens surveyed said they would be interested in participating in community events hosted at the ruin. I recommend planning a couple of smaller events that gauge the true interest in the local community to ensure that there is success in future events. Providing local community with cultural events promotes celebration of history of the land and will promote desires to continue to preserve it and celebrate it. Giving the local community an opportunity to see what these events could look like could inspire them to be more supportive of future events. And combining all three of these recommendations would result in the highest spread of information about the Palo Verde ruin and the most culturally authentic events.
So once again, we wanted to say thank you to partner with the Historic Preservation Commission and ASU Project Cities for allowing us to apply our academic methods in the real world. And I believe now we can take any questions that you have.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Belen Lopez, and I am also a graduate student at ASU, finishing up my master's degree in public administration. And today, I'll be talking to you about my part of the project, which was focusing on engaging Indigenous communities in the planning and preservation efforts of the Palo Verde ruin. So since the City of Peoria has been interested in engaging the community overall in the planning and preservation effort, the purpose of this project was basically to analyze and determine how other cities and organizations have collaborated with indigenous communities in historic planning and preservation efforts. And since there was a lack of engagement from the City of Peoria so far, my two research questions, the first one is, what have other cities and organizations done to engage with indigenous communities about historic preservation and site plans? And the second one is, how can Peoria best engage with indigenous communities in Palo Verde historic preservation and plans? First and foremost, the methodology that I used for my project was a qualitative approach, and I also completed a literature review where I analyzed how other cities, specifically Tempe, and how 2 universities from Arizona have engaged indigenous communities that you will see in the next slide. Also, there was the survey that Madison and Julia already talked about a little bit. I included a little bit of information, but not a lot, since you already heard most of the information. And then I also got to interview the architectural services manager from the City of Peoria, which was a great interaction where I learned the legal aspects of preservation efforts and how it works when working in a indigenous site. Okay. So this first slide, it's about the findings, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the 3 case studies that I found. The first one is the Tempe one, and they are a great city that has recently been trying to engage indigenous communities. They are located in the Phoenix Valley, and they have acknowledged the city to be the land of ancestral territory for the Acoma, Otoham, and Pipash communities. Even though the development of the city caused removal of indigenous communities in the past and colonization, the city has now begun to address the decolonization and attempt to design projects that are more that address the power imbalance and that are more inclusive, while also benefiting the whole community. In a video series that the City of Tempe created, they acknowledged that they started to engage indigenous communities by contacting tribes such as the Salt River Maricopa community, the Pasquojaki community, and the Gila River Indian community in the decision-making process, allowing the communities a space to discuss future changes in the city, as well as a place to heal and build autonomy. With this, it resulted in a more inclusive legacy that the City of Tempe has started. Also, they have done a few projects. One of them is called the Cool Kids, Cool Places, and Cool Futures project that focuses on inviting young community members to have their voices heard and have them influence outcomes of climate change, since that's definitely a big problem right now. And they also specifically highlight indigenous notions of decolonization and resilience. The City of Tempe also noted that they were inspired by the City of Oakland's design, which provided a new standard for urban design, focusing on 3 important factors, such as developing cultural appropriate designs, protecting local knowledge, and increasing citizens' awareness of the natural landscape. In the case study, Tempe also acknowledged that they want to continue to strive further engagement with indigenous communities by planning events that involve native dancers, musicians, and artists. Another case study was the University of Arizona, where they talked about creating a Sonora Desert School Runners Almanac. This almanac is a resource that is provided for the students and teachers and the community members, where they introduce and they're basically aiming to educate the people about the Sonoran Desert and its local people. Also, at ASU, there are different departments that are trying to engage Indigenous communities. One of them is the Indigenous Design Collaborative. They are a community-driven design and construction program that brings together tribal community members, industry and multidisciplinary team of ASU students and faculty members to co-design and co-develop solutions for tribal communities in Arizona. They specifically seek to make design processes inclusive by focusing on projects that are tribal sustainable housing to urban indigenous placekeeping studies. Another department is the Liberal National American Indian Data Center at ASU. They specifically serve as a resource for students by educating them on identifiers used to find Indigenous information when conducting research, as well as helping them develop skills that help with decolonization. Lastly, another department is the Sustainable Cities Network. They recently posted a blog on their site regarding an event they organized along with stakeholders and organizations that highlighted important voices emphasizing in climate efforts. They specifically, during the event, engage Indigenous communities by being able to share their efforts to establish collaborative of Indigenous artists that seek to incorporate Indigenous perspectives and design into cities in the valley. They also emphasize the need to honor Indigenous cultures in Maricopa. Their work is sponsored and was made possible by a grant that funds partnership involving artists and the Indigenous Design Collaborative. And to continue my findings, I wanted to talk a little bit about the interview that I had with the Architectural Services Manager, here in Peoria. He talked a little bit about how Peoria has already engaged in a federal level with Indigenous communities by occasionally having to get consultation from them whenever it's necessary when working in a site and when it's legally necessary. Also, during the project, I had an opportunity to analyze both the Palo Verde Interpretive Plan and the Historic Preservation Master Plan. During this time, I concluded that both of the plans were a little bit outdated, and there's a lack of, unfortunately, it does not currently reflect the efforts that the community of Peoria is doing to engage Indigenous communities and the community overall. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the survey. I just wanted to focus most of it on the demographics, just because I noticed that, I think Madison already mentioned it, but I noticed that only 2 people in the demographic section identified as American Indian or Alaska Native. So, and most of the other participants identified as white. So there's definitely a need for future engagement within the city of Peoria with Indigenous communities. Another thing that I found was the grants section, and the first grant, the placemaking grant, is the grant that the City of Tempe utilized, and it is a great way to connect and build new connections with Indigenous communities. This grant allows communities to focus on community issues, history, or infrastructure, while also allowing that opportunity to have that connection. And then there's another grant. It's called the Arizona Humanities Grant, providing opportunities to support community projects that utilize humanities disciplines to connect with Arizonans to cultures, peoples, and histories of the state. And lastly, I wanted to go over 5 recommendations that I've made for the city of Peoria. This is solely since I noticed that there's a lack of engagement with Indigenous communities. And first and foremost, I feel like it's really important for the City of Peoria to modernize and update their historic plan documents because it doesn't do justice to the work that you guys have already been doing and to the Palo Verde ruin so far. I would also recommend updating and stating or including what preservation, what successful preservation means for the City of Peoria. And during my research, I found that some people preserve or call successful preservation when it's within the city or the organization, and others focus more outside or the outside resources. So it'd be important just to identify how that would look for Peoria. Also, the second one is to identify relevant indigenous communities. I went ahead and put a picture of the federally recognized tribes in Arizona. Although we don't know exactly which tribes Peoria could engage with, I feel like it would be definitely important to consider the local tribes and ones near Peoria. The third recommendation is that invitations to participate. I feel like it'd be important to invite indigenous tribes or members of tribes to participate in meetings like this, in the historic preservation meeting, or even creating some kind of focus group where they can express their culture and their knowledge. During my research, I found that one of the best things that the indigenous communities have to offer is their knowledge, and including that knowledge into the City of Peoria would be very beneficial. Another recommendation is utilizing interns. I believe if you guys have the opportunity to connect with local universities and probably creating an internship where they can help updating master plans or coming up with new ways to engage indigenous communities, or even reaching out to other people who have already done this and they have successfully contacted indigenous communities. During my project, I had a chance to reach out to both the City of Tempe and the other two case studies, but unfortunately, because of the time allotted for the project, I didn't get in touch with them. So I believe it'd be important for interns to go ahead and continue that to see what resources they can get. Lastly, I believe it's important to utilize the resources that are out there. So I would recommend utilizing a grant or something that it could help the City of Peoria make those connections and engage with indigenous communities. I want to thank you so much for having me and for having us during this presentation. Any questions?